Imagine this: a decorated 4-star female general, celebrated for her bravery and leadership, suddenly falls gravely ill. The finest medical minds, 22 doctors in total, scramble to save her, pulling out every tool, every test, every expert opinion. Yet, despite their years of training and expertise, nothing seems to work. Time is slipping away, and the situation is becoming desperate. The tension in the hospital is suffocating, the kind of pressure that makes even the most seasoned doctors second-guess themselves. But then, in the midst of the chaos, an unlikely figure enters the story: a single dad, working quietly as a janitor. He isn't wearing a white coat, he doesn't have a medical degree, and no one would expect him to notice what the top specialists missed. Yet, there's something in the way he looks around the room, the way he observes details others overlook. It's almost instinctual, almost like he can see the story behind the chaos, the subtle clues that point to a solution hiding in plain sight. As the cameras follow the frantic doctors and the steady janitor, a question hangs in the air: could this ordinary man, who cleans floors by day and raises his child by night, hold the key to saving one of the most powerful women in the military? The answer isn't obvious, and the stakes couldn't be higher. In a story where life hangs by a thread, sometimes the person you least expect makes all the difference. The general's condition had deteriorated so quickly that even the hospital's ICU felt like a battlefield. Monitors beeped relentlessly, alarms flashing as doctors debated treatment options, each one more complicated than the last. Nurses moved like clockwork, administering medication and checking vitals, but no one could pinpoint what was really wrong. Every theory seemed plausible, yet none of them matched the symptoms. The tension in the room was electric, a mix of fear, frustration, and the weight of responsibility. Meanwhile, the janitor, a man named Mark, quietly pushed his mop down the hallway, carrying his lunch and glancing at the monitors from a distance. He had been working in this hospital for years, always noticing small details that others ignored: a misplaced chart, a flickering light, a patient who mentioned a symptom almost as an afterthought. He didn't know why, but something about the general's case felt different. Something felt off. Mark remembered his own daughter, sick with a stubborn fever not long ago, and how one tiny observation from a visiting nurse had changed everything. He wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a detail hiding in plain sight here too. The doctors were too busy with the obvious symptoms, the complicated diagnoses, and the high-tech equipment to notice what he was seeing. As the minutes stretched into hours, every second felt heavier. The general's life hung by a thread, the pressure mounting, and the question became impossible to ignore. Could an ordinary man, unnoticed and underestimated, spot what the experts had completely missed? And if he did, would anyone listen? The answer was still unknown, but the tension in the room was palpable, and the story was far from over. Mark lingered near the nurse's station, pretending to mop while his eyes darted toward the monitors and the cluster of doctors surrounding the general. Each specialist was deep in their own reasoning, one arguing for a rare infection, another insisting it was a reaction to medication, a third debating whether an undetected allergy could be the culprit. The tension between them was almost tangible, sharp enough to cut through the sterile air of the ICU. Meanwhile, the general's family waited in the quiet corner of the hospital, faces drawn and hands intertwined. Her younger sister whispered prayers under her breath, while a military aide tried to stay composed, balancing protocol with panic. The stakes weren't just personal, they were national. Losing a 4-star general wasn't just a tragedy, it was a story that would shake the very heart of the armed forces. Mark's mind raced, connecting tiny details he had seen: a chart that didn't quite match the timeline, a subtle reaction during a routine procedure, the way the general's eyes flickered when certain equipment was used. To anyone else, these would be insignificant, but to him, they screamed of something the doctors had overlooked. He knew he couldn't interrupt the professionals outright, they might dismiss him. But the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. It was as if the general's life was silently depending on someone noticing what everyone else had missed. Outside the ICU, whispers spread through the hospital staff. Some noticed the janitor's unusual focus, others were too busy with their own shifts to pay attention. The tension built with each passing minute, and a quiet question hung over the room: could one ordinary man really see the key detail that 22 highly trained doctors had completely missed? The answer remained just out of reach, and the suspense was suffocating. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. monitors beeped relentlessly, casting a staccato rhythm over the room that mirrored the anxiety in everyone's chest. The doctors were exhausted, their confidence cracking under the pressure of a life they couldn't seem to save. They argued in hushed, urgent tones, each one convinced their next move would be the breakthrough, yet every intervention only seemed to complicate matters. Mark stayed in the background, moving quietly, eyes scanning the room and the charts like a detective following a trail no one else could see. He noticed the small things, a faint rash on the general's arm, a barely perceptible irregularity in the 4 readings, the slight pallor of her lips in certain lights. Each clue was a whisper, almost invisible to everyone else, but to Mark, they were screaming for attention. The general's breathing grew shallow, and the room's tension became almost unbearable. Nurses hovered anxiously, adjusting machines and checking vitals, while her family clutched each other, their whispered prayers merging with the frantic beeping of the monitors. Even the most seasoned doctors felt their hands tremble, their minds racing through every protocol they had memorized, wondering if they had truly exhausted every possibility. Mark's heart pounded as a single thought consumed him: if he didn't act, if no one noticed what he saw, she might not make it through the night. He knew that stepping forward would mean challenging the authority of 22 top doctors, but the urgency in the room left no room for hesitation. The seconds ticked by, heavy and unrelenting, and the question that hung over the ICU was clear: could the unnoticed janitor uncover what the experts had failed to see in time? Just as Mark was about to step closer, determined to point out what he had noticed, a new complication hit the ICU like a storm. One of the monitors began to spike erratically, flashing warnings that no one had seen before. The general's vitals wavered wildly, her heart rate jumped, then dropped, her oxygen levels dipping dangerously. The doctors froze, their earlier debates replaced by urgent, overlapping commands. Every second now carried a weight that felt unbearable. Then came the twist no one expected: a lab report arrived, showing an anomaly that contradicted everything the doctors had assumed. The infection they had been treating wasn't the culprit. The medication they had relied on for hours might even be worsening her condition. Murmurs spread through the ICU, even the most confident physicians exchanged uneasy glances. It was a scenario no one had prepared for, a mystery growing more dangerous by the minute. Mark felt a surge of urgency. His instincts, sharpened by years of noticing what others overlooked, told him that the clue was right in front of everyone, hidden in the details no one was connecting. But he also realized that time was slipping away faster than ever. Each passing moment brought the general closer to the brink, and now, even the professionals were vulnerable to missing the one solution that could save her life. The family's worry intensified, the hospital's energy shifted from controlled urgency to raw anxiety, and the question in everyone's mind grew louder: who would see what needed to be seen before it was too late? The stage was set, the stakes higher than ever, and the clock was ticking toward a revelation that no one, not even the doctors, could predict. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing on him like nothing he had ever felt before. The general's vitals were dangerously unstable, the alarms screaming, the doctors circling in a whirlwind of panic. For a split second, he hesitated, but then his eyes locked onto the chart, the 4 lines, the faint rash on her arm, and everything clicked. He knew what had been missed: a rare allergic reaction to a compound in one of the medications that had been assumed safe. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, screaming in plain sight to anyone patient enough to notice. Without thinking, Mark called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Wait! Stop the latest dose, look at her reaction to this one medicine." Heads turned, skepticism flashing across the doctors' faces. But the desperation in his tone forced them to listen. Hesitant hands adjusted the treatment, the medication was halted, and immediately the general's vitals began to stabilize, her breathing evened, the color returning to her lips. The room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath for hours.